The scream came before the music stopped. Emmanuel Karmo's fingers were still moving across the keys when he heard it. Not with his ears, but with the part of him that had spent 19 years learning to feel the world through sound. A shift in the room. A chair scraping backward too fast. The sharp intake of breath from somewhere near the third row, followed by the kind of silence that doesn't belong in a concert hall. The kind that means something has broken inside a person. He kept playing. That was the first thing his teacher in Monrovia had told him. Whatever happens in the room, you keep playing. The music is the only honest thing left in a dishonest world. So Emmanuel kept his fingers moving, kept the melody rising through the grand ballroom of the Latte Hotel Seoul. Let it climb into the chandelier light and settle into the bones of every powerful person seated below him. Senators, judges, construction magnates. The kind of men who built cities on top of secrets. He had been told it was a charity gala. He had not been told it would change everything. The melody he was playing now was not on the program. It had started as an improvisation, the way it always did when he felt the room growing too comfortable, too pleased with itself. He had felt the self-satisfaction in the applause, the polite distance in the silence between movements, and something in him had shifted to this. A sequence of notes he had played since he was a child. A pattern that lived somewhere beneath memory. He didn't know where it came from. He had never been able to explain it. It simply arrived. The way hunger arrives, the way grief arrives, without permission and without a name. He was 3 minutes into it when the room changed. Not everyone. Just one person. Emmanuel could hear it the way a doctor hears a cracked rib under pressure. One man in the audience had stopped breathing normally. The rhythm was wrong. Too shallow. Too fast. Like a man standing at the edge of something he had spent 20 years running from. Emmanuel filed it away and kept playing. He did not know yet that the man was Kang Min-jae. He did not know yet that Kang Min-jae had helped bury a body in 2003. He did not know yet that the melody currently pouring from his fingers was the reason that body had never been found. Han Soo-jin was not supposed to be watching the pianist. She was supposed to be watching Kang Min-jae. She had spent 4 months building a file on him. Construction contracts inflated by 30%. City permits approved overnight. A network of shell companies that dissolved and reformed like smoke every time an auditor got close. She had come to the gala tonight because 3 of his business partners were in that room and she needed photographs, names, table arrangements, the kind of evidence that told a story without a single word. She had her camera. She had her press credentials. She had a table in the back assigned to a journalist from a smaller outlet whose invitation she had borrowed without asking. What she had not planned for was Kang Min-jae standing up. Welcome back to Afrokorean Storyhouse channel. Before we continue with this story, tell us in the comment section where you are watching from. And if you are new here, hit the like and subscribe button, and don't forget to turn on your notification to get notified whenever we drop a video. Let's get back into the story. He didn't excuse himself. He didn't lean to whisper to the woman beside him. He simply rose from his seat in the middle of the performance, knocking his water glass with the back of his hand, and stood there with his palms pressed flat against the table like a man trying to hold himself to the earth. Soo-jin raised her camera. His face was the face of someone being pulled underwater. She photographed it 6 times before he composed himself and sat back down. Then she looked at the pianist. The blind man on the stage was still playing, head slightly tilted, utterly still except for his hands. She could not see his eyes behind the dark glasses, but she had the sudden, irrational feeling that he knew exactly what he had just done to the man in the 3rd row. She took a photograph of him too. The attack came at 11:47. Emmanuel had packed his bag, declined the post-gala reception, and found his way to the side exit using the mental map he had built on arrival. 14 steps from the stage stairs to the corridor, left at the temperature change where the air conditioning vent was, 31 steps to the glass door that opened onto the service alley where his driver waited. He was at step 19 when he heard the second set of footsteps. Not his driver. His driver walked with a slight drag on the left heel, a sound Emmanuel had catalogued in their first meeting 3 weeks ago. These footsteps were even, deliberate. 2 people, not one, keeping a fixed distance of approximately 4 meters behind him. He slowed slightly. They slowed. He stopped to adjust the strap of his bag. They stopped. He turned his face slightly to the left, as though checking the corridor, and said clearly, "I can hear you both." Silence. Then the first one moved. Emmanuel dropped low before the hand reached him, a reflex built from years of navigating a world that didn't announce itself. He felt the rush of air above his head, used the sound of the man's momentum to locate him, and drove his elbow backward into what his instincts told him was a solar plexus. The grunt confirmed it. He spun left, using the wall as his reference point, and heard the second man closing fast from the right. He ran. Not blind panic, calculated. He counted steps, tracked the echo of his own footfall against the corridor walls, felt the air pressure change that told him the glass door was close. He hit it shoulder first and came out into the cold Seoul night 3 seconds ahead of both men. His driver was there. "Drive," Emmanuel said, pulling the door shut behind him. "Now, Mr. Karmo. Now." The car pulled away. Emmanuel sat in the back seat with his hands resting on his knees, his breathing measured and controlled, the melody still looping quietly in the back of his mind. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. A woman's voice, low and precise, like someone who had learned to remove all excess from her words. "The song you played tonight," she said. "Where did you learn it?" Emmanuel was quiet for a moment. "Who is this?" "Someone who needs to know if you're dangerous or just unlucky." He thought about the 2 men in the corridor. He thought about the way the room had shifted when his fingers found that particular sequence of notes. He thought about the restlessness that had lived in his chest for as long as he could remember, the feeling of something unfinished, something waiting. "I don't know where it came from," he said. "I've played it since I was a child." A pause. "Then you're unlucky," the woman said. "For now." She hung up. Emmanuel lowered the phone and stared ahead into the darkness he had always lived in, and for the first time in his life, the darkness stared back. Sujin found him the next morning. He was sitting at the upright piano in the common room of his apartment building in Mapogu, playing something slow and unresolved, like a question that kept refusing its own answer. She had spent the night running his name through every database she had access to. Emmanuel Karmo, born in Monrovia, Liberia. Adopted at age 6 by the Karmo family after being found wandering near the Firestone rubber plantation with no identification and no memory of how he had gotten there. Blind since age 8 following a fever that destroyed his optic nerves. Full scholarship to the Korea National University of Arts at 24. No criminal record. No known affiliations. No social media presence beyond a sparse university profile. Nothing that explained why 2 of Kang Min-jae's private security contractors had followed him out of a hotel last night. She had confirmed that detail at 2 in the morning through a contact in a private investigations firm who owed her 3 favors. The men were professionals. They had not been there to deliver a message. She pushed through the lobby door and stopped in front of the piano. He stopped playing. "You're the journalist," he said. She hadn't made a sound coming in. The door was on a pneumatic hinge, silent. Her shoes were rubber-soled. She had not spoken. "How?" she said. "Your perfume was in the row behind Kang Min-jae last night. Same scent. Same woman." He turned his face toward her with the particular quality of attention she would come to recognize over the following days. Not looking exactly, but arriving. "You took photographs during my performance. I heard the shudder. You took more when Min-jae stood up." Sujin didn't move. "You could have been guessing." "I don't guess. I listen." He folded his hands in his lap. "You called me last night. I needed to know if you understood what you'd done. And now I need to know if you're going to be a problem or an asset." The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Emmanuel's expression didn't change, but something shifted around his mouth. Not quite a smile. More like recognition. "You still think I'm a suspect," he said. "I think you walked into a room full of powerful people and played a song that made one of them fall apart. I think 2 professionals were waiting for you in a corridor 40 minutes later. And I think you're sitting here playing piano like none of that happened." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down without being invited. "So yes," Until I understand what you are, you're a variable. Emmanuel was quiet for a long moment. Sit down, he said. Oh, a pause. You already did. She showed him what she had. Not everything. She wasn't ready for that. But enough. She described Kang Min-jae's reaction in detail. The knocked glass, the flattened palms, the face of a man being swallowed by something that had been waiting underground for a very long time. Emmanuel listened without interrupting. This was another thing she would come to understand about him. He did not fill silences. He used them. When she finished, he said, "Play the footage back." "There's no footage. I had a camera, not a video recorder." "Then describe his breathing." She blinked. "What?" "When he stood up. Describe how he was breathing. Depth, rate, whether his shoulders were involved." She thought back. She had the photographs. She had not thought to notice his breathing, but the images were precise enough that she could reconstruct it. Shallow, fast, shoulders high and rigid, which meant the breath was coming from the chest, not the diaphragm. A fear response, not surprise, fear. The specific quality of fear that comes not from something approaching but from something remembered. She described it. Emmanuel nodded slowly. "He wasn't reacting to me," he said. "He was reacting to the melody. There's a difference. If it were about me, he would have watched the stage. His instinct would have been to locate the threat. But he looked down." "How do you know he looked down?" "Because you photographed his face and you didn't mention his eyes being on the stage." He tilted his head slightly. "What were his eyes doing?" She pulled out the photographs and looked at them properly for the first time since printing them. She had been focused on his expression, his posture, the political implications of a man like Kang Min-jae visibly losing composure in public. She had not looked at where his gaze was directed. Down. And slightly to the left. Inward. "He was seeing something," she said quietly. "He was remembering something," Emmanuel said. "The melody did that. Not me." Soo-jin set the photographs on the piano lid and looked at this man she had come here to interrogate and felt the first small crack appear in her certainty that he was part of whatever she was investigating. "Where does the melody come from?" "I don't know." "You've played it since childhood and you don't know." "Would you know the origin of every song you hummed as a child?" "I'd try to find out if people started following me home because of it." Emmanuel's jaw tightened slightly. It was the first real reaction she had seen from him. Not fear. Something older. The particular tension of a person who has spent their entire life being asked to justify what they know by instinct. "I have been trying to find out," he said quietly. "My whole life." The woman arrived at his door at 3 in the afternoon. Emmanuel heard her in the hallway before she knocked. Slow footsteps, the kind that carry weight not of age but of decision, as though each one had been considered before being placed. She knocked 3 times. Measured. Almost formal. He opened the door. She was old. He could tell from the texture of her voice when she spoke, from the slight tremor she was trying to suppress, from the way the air moved around her, carefully, as though her body had learned to take up less space. "You played last night," she said in Korean. "At the Latte Hotel." "Yes." "The melody. Near the end." Her voice fractured at the edges. "The one that moves like water going uphill." Emmanuel went very still. That was exactly how he had always described it to himself. Water going uphill. A sound that moved against its own nature. "Yes," he said again, more carefully this time. She made a sound he had no name for. Not a sob. Something deeper and older than a sob. A sound that had been waiting inside a person for 2 decades. "That melody," she whispered, "belonged to my daughter." Emmanuel stood in the doorway of his apartment in Seoul and felt the restlessness in his chest. The thing that had lived there his whole life, the nameless missing weight, shift for the first time. Not gone, but moving, as though it had finally found the direction it had been looking for. He stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. Soo-jin was still there when the old woman entered. She had been preparing to leave, gathering her photographs, reassembling the professional distance she preferred to keep between herself and her sources. But something made her stop when she saw the woman's face. She had seen that face before. Not the woman. The expression. She had seen it in the photographs she kept in a locked folder on her laptop. Images from old news archives, protest movements, cases that had been closed too quickly and too cleanly. The expression of someone who has been carrying a secret so long that the secret has begun to weigh more than the person. The woman sat down without looking at Sujin. Her entire attention was on Emmanuel, who had returned to the piano bench and was sitting with his hands in his lap. What was her name? Emmanuel asked. Park Yun-hee, the woman said. My daughter. She was 26 when she disappeared. A pause that lasted the length of a held breath. 22 years ago. What did she do? She was a researcher. She worked for a private firm that was contracted to audit government construction projects. The woman's hands, folded in her lap, pressed together. She found things she was not supposed to find. Numbers that did not add up. Names that appeared on contracts that should not have existed. A network. She stopped. Sujin had stopped breathing. A network involving Kang Min-jae. The woman continued. The name dropped into the room like a detonation. Sujin looked at Emmanuel. Emmanuel's face was turned toward the old woman with that quality of absolute arrival. Every sense directed inward, processing. She knew she was in danger, the woman said. She told me she had found a way to hide what she had discovered, that even if they took everything from her, the evidence would survive. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. I didn't understand what she meant. Not until last night, when I heard you play. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Sujin had ever heard. Emmanuel's hands moved to the piano keys without him seeming to decide to move them. He played 4 bars of the melody. Slow. Questioning. The old woman closed her eyes. That is it, she whispered. That is exactly it. Emmanuel lifted his hands from the keys. She hid the evidence in the music. It was not a question. I believe so, the woman said. I believe my daughter encoded everything she found into that melody. And I believe she played it for someone before they took her. She opened her eyes. They were dry now, past tears. Someone very small, who would carry it without knowing. The restlessness in Emmanuel's chest stopped moving. It didn't disappear. It simply became something else entirely. Something that felt, for the first time in 27 years, like the beginning of an answer. They came for him that night. Not the careful professionals from the hotel corridor. Those men had been a warning. What came through Emmanuel's apartment door at midnight was something different. Faster, less patient, carrying the specific energy of people who had been told that caution was no longer an option. Emmanuel was already awake. He had not slept since the old woman left. He had been sitting at his piano in the dark. His dark, the permanent one, the only one he had ever known. Running the melody forward and backward, listening to it the way a jeweler listens to a stone, turning it to find the facets. Sujin had wanted to stay. He had sent her home. This part he needed to do alone. He heard them on the stairs at 12:23. 3 men. 1 positioned at the stairwell entrance. 2 moving toward his floor. Professional spacing. Coordinated. They were not here to search the apartment this time. Emmanuel stood from the piano bench. He crossed to the kitchen, opened the 3rd drawer, and removed the white cane he never used in public. Not from vanity, but because the tap of it announced his position in a room, and he had long since decided that silence was the superior tool. Tonight was different. Tonight he needed it for something else. He moved to the wall beside the front door and waited. The lock took them 11 seconds. Good equipment. He filed that detail away. These were not hired thugs. Someone with resources had sent them. Someone who had made a phone call tonight after the old woman's visit. Which meant the apartment was being watched. Which meant someone knew she had come. Which meant she was in danger. The door opened inward. The first man came through fast and low, the way trained people enter a room they expect to be empty. Emmanuel let him pass, took 1 step, and drove the heel of his palm into the back of the man's neck with the full weight of his body behind it. The man went down without a sound. The second man was already inside, reacting, and he was bigger. Emmanuel felt the displaced air, the heavier footfall, recalibrated in under a second and went low instead of high. taking the man's legs out from under him and using the momentum to slam him into the kitchen counter. A grunt, a clatter of something metallic hitting the floor. A gun. Emmanuel kicked it toward the sound of the far wall and heard it skitter into the corner. Then the third man, the one from the stairwell, who had not been where Emmanuel predicted, hit him from the left side with enough force to throw him across the piano bench. Emmanuel went over it and hit the floor hard, the cane skidding away, and for 3 seconds the world was nothing but ringing and disorientation and the sound of a large man moving fast across a small room. He rolled. The kick that was meant for his ribs caught his shoulder instead. He used the pain to locate the man precisely, grabbed the outstretched leg by the ankle, twisted with everything he had, and felt the knee give in a direction knees are not designed to travel. The scream was enormous in the small apartment. Emmanuel was on his feet before it finished. He found his cane, found the door, moved into the corridor and down the stairs with the controlled speed of a man who had memorized every surface of this building in his first week of living in it, because that was what you did when the world didn't come with a map. He was outside and moving before anyone on his floor had opened a door to investigate the noise. He called Soo-jin from a convenience store 3 blocks away. She answered on the second ring, which meant she hadn't been sleeping either. 3 men, he said. My apartment. Armed. A pause that lasted exactly as long as it took her to make a decision. Are you hurt? Shoulder. Nothing structural. Where are you? He read her the name on the convenience store sign, transliterated from the Hangul by the cashier who was staring at him with the particular expression people reserved for a blind man who had clearly just been in a fight. Don't move, Soo-jin said. I'm 12 minutes away. She arrived in 9. She came through the door of the convenience store with her bag over one shoulder and a look on her face that he couldn't see but could hear in the quality of her footsteps. Fast, purposeful, the hesitation entirely gone. She sat across from him at the small plastic table, and he heard her take in his appearance. Your lip, she said. I know. And your shoulder. I know. He leaned forward. The old woman. She needs to be warned. If they know she came to me, I already called her. Soo-jin's voice was flat and controlled. No answer. The silence between them tightened. Address, Emmanuel said. Emmanuel. Do you have her address or not? The old woman lived in a narrow house in Yunpyeong-gu, on a street that climbed the hillside in shallow steps between walls covered in faded tiles. Soo-jin drove with both hands on the wheel and said nothing for most of the journey, which Emmanuel appreciated. He was using the silence to think. The melody was evidence. That much was now clear. Park Yun-hee had encoded her findings into a musical pattern sophisticated enough to survive 2 decades inside the unconscious memory of a 4-year-old child. That meant she had been a precise and extraordinary person. It also meant the pattern had structure, not just emotional but informational. There was data inside it. Specific data. Names, figures, connections, the kind of thing that could dismantle a network of powerful men if it were properly decoded. Which meant he was not just a witness. He was a hard drive, and someone had just tried to wipe him. The old woman, he said as Soo-jin navigated the hill road. What is her name? Park Chunja. She was a schoolteacher. Retired. A pause. She lost her daughter and then she lost her son-in-law 2 years later. Officially a car accident. Officially. His car went off the Mapo Bridge in January 2005. No other vehicles involved. Investigation closed in 3 weeks. Emmanuel said nothing. She has been living alone since then, Soo-jin continued, and something had changed in her voice. The professional flatness was still there, but underneath it, something else. Not sentiment exactly. Something more precise than sentiment. The particular quality of anger that comes from looking at injustice long enough to understand its exact dimensions. She attended every anniversary of her daughter's disappearance. Filed formal inquiries every 2 years until 2018. Then she stopped. Because she gave up? Because she got old and tired and the people she was filing inquiries with were the same people she was filing inquiries about. Soo-jin slowed the car. We're here. The front door of the house was open. Not broken. Not forced. Simply open. the way a door is left open by someone who stepped out for a moment and intended to return. Emmanuel stood on the threshold and listened to the interior. No movement, no breathing, the particular quality of silence that means a space has been recently vacated. "She's not here," he said. Sujin pushed past him and he heard her moving through the rooms quickly, efficiently, the way she did everything. He stepped inside and let the house speak to him. Old wood. Incense that had burned out hours ago. The faint trace of a meal cooked earlier in the evening. And beneath all of it something recent, overlaid. The sterile, impersonal scent of people who had been here and were not supposed to be. Emmanuel. Sujin's voice came from a back room, tight and controlled but with something underneath it. He followed the sound. She was standing in what he understood to be a small study or sitting room. He could tell from the paper, the particular dry smell of many documents, and from the particular acoustic quality of a room with bookshelves along multiple walls. "The room has been searched," she said, carefully, not ransacked. Someone who knew what they were looking for. Any photographs? Personal documents? Cleared. All of them. A pause. But they missed something. He heard her crouch. The sound of something being lifted from a low surface. "There's a music box," she said, hidden under the bottom shelf behind a row of books. Old Korean lacquerwork. A small mechanical sound as she opened it. A few fragile notes of a melody rose into the room. Emmanuel's breath stopped. It was the first 4 bars of his melody. "She left it," he said. "Or she hid it before they came and didn't have time to take it with her." No, he was certain. He didn't know how, but he was. "She left it for me. She knew I would come." He extended his hand. "May I?" Sujin placed the music box in his palm. He felt the lacquered surface, the small hinge, the tiny mechanism inside. He turned it carefully and found what he was looking for on the underside of the lid. Small raised markings pressed into the lacquer. Not decorative. Deliberate. A pattern of dots and dashes arranged in a grid. He recognized from the sheet music notation system. His first teacher in Monrovia had used to teach him to read music by touch. His fingers moved across it slowly. A name, an address, a date, and 4 words beneath them that made the hairs on his arms rise. "She knew about you." Sujin drove while Emmanuel recited the address from memory. It took them across the Han River into Gangnam, into the kind of streets where the buildings had no signs because the people who used them didn't need signs. Old money. The architecture of certainty. "The date in the box," Sujin said. 2003, November 14th. The night Park Yun-hee disappeared. "And the name?" Emmanuel was quiet for a moment. The name on the underside of that music box lid was not the name of Kang Min-jae. It was not the name of any businessman or politician Sujin had mentioned in her 4 months of investigation. "The name," he said carefully, "is Oh Chunja." Sujin's hands tightened on the wheel. "That's the same family name as the old woman. Oh and Park are different names." She introduced herself as Park Chunja. "Park was her married name," Emmanuel said. "Her birth name was Oh. She changed it when she married. But before she married, before she became someone's mother and someone's wife and someone's grieving parent." He stopped. The car was silent except for the sound of the city moving past them. "Before all of that," he said quietly, "she was something else entirely." Sujin said nothing for a long moment. Then, "You think the old woman is not who she said she was?" "I think she is exactly who she said she was," Emmanuel said. "A mother who lost her daughter. A grandmother who lost her grandchild." He turned his face toward the window and the city he had never seen and never would. "I also think those things don't cancel out everything else a person can be." Sujin took a breath. "The address in the box. What's there?" Emmanuel unfolded the piece of paper he had asked her to write the details on while he recited them. He held it even though he couldn't read it. An old habit. Something to hold when the ground was moving. "A recording studio," he said, "registered to a subsidiary of Kang Min-jae's holding company." He paused. "And according to the date, it is where Park Yun-hee spent the last night of her life." Sujin pulled the car to the curb. She turned off the engine. In the silence that followed, Emmanuel heard her doing what he had done earlier at the piano. Turning something over and over, looking for the facet that changed everything. She didn't just encode the evidence in your memory, Sujin said slowly. She made a backup. Emmanuel nodded. The original recording. The one she made before they caught her. He held the music box tightly in both hands. It's still there. The recording studio was underground. Not metaphorically. Literally beneath street level. Accessible through a service entrance at the back of a building that presented itself to the world as a language academy. Emmanuel stood at the top of the concrete steps and listened to the space below. Deep, acoustically treated. The particular deadness of a room built to absorb sound rather than reflect it, which meant thick walls, which meant whatever happened inside it stayed inside it. He had been in rooms like this before. Practice studios. Isolation booths. Spaces designed for the careful capture of sound. He had never considered until tonight that such a room could be designed equally well for the careful destruction of a person. Cameras, Sujin said quietly beside him. She had been scanning the building's exterior for the past 3 minutes with the methodical patience of someone who had learned surveillance by doing it wrong once and paying for it. 2 visible on the language academy frontage. None on the service entrance. They wouldn't put cameras on an entrance they didn't want recorded, Emmanuel said. Exactly. She descended 2 steps and stopped. The lock is electronic. I can't. The door opened from the inside. They both went still. A man stood in the doorway. Not large. Not visibly armed. Somewhere in his 60s, wearing a plain gray jacket, with the careful posture of a person who had spent decades in rooms where posture communicated power. He looked at Sujin. Then he looked at Emmanuel with an expression that Emmanuel couldn't see but Sujin would later describe as the look of a man confronting something he had planned for and dreaded in equal measure. I wondered how long it would take, the man said in Korean. Sujin's hand moved toward her bag. The man shook his head once. I'm not armed. I'm not here to stop you. He stepped back from the doorway. I've been waiting 22 years to let someone in. His name was Lim Dong-hyun. He had been the recording engineer on the night of November 14, 2003. He told them this sitting in the control room of the studio, under fluorescent light that had the tired quality of a room that had not been properly aired in years. The equipment around them was old. Not antique, simply unchanged. A room preserved exactly as it had been, with the specific intentionality of a person who understood that the day might come when the original condition of things would matter. Emmanuel sat with his hands on his knees and listened. She came in at 9 in the evening, Lim said. I didn't know who she was. I was told a researcher needed to make a private recording. Unusual request, but the booking was paid for and the building owner had connections I didn't ask questions about. He paused. She was frightened. I could see that immediately. But she was also… He searched for the word. Precise, Emmanuel said. Lim looked at him. Yes, precise. She knew exactly what she needed and how long it would take. She sat at the studio piano and she played a composition I had never heard. 40 minutes straight. No breaks. No hesitation. His voice had the quality of a man recounting something he had replayed so many times in his memory that it had worn smooth. When she finished, she asked me to embed the audio file inside the studio's backup archive under a dummy project name. She said if anyone came looking for it, to tell them it didn't exist. And if the right person came… He reached under the console and produced a piece of folded paper. To give them this. He placed it on the console between them. Sujin reached for it. Emmanuel heard the paper unfold. Silence. What does it say? Emmanuel asked. Sujin's voice when she answered had changed register entirely. Not professional. Not investigative. Something rawer than either of those. It's addressed to you, she said. By name. The air in the room changed. She knew your name, Sujin said. Emmanuel. She wrote it at the top. A pause. She writes. She writes that she is sorry she cannot be there. That she is sorry for everything that came before and everything that is coming. That the melody is yours and has always been yours. Another pause. Longer. She writes that she played it for you every night when you were small, that you would fall asleep to it and then hum it back to her in the mornings. Sujin stopped. The fluorescent light hummed above them. She writes, Sujin continued, very quietly, that your Korean name is Park Sung-min, that you were born in Seoul on the 3rd of March, 1999, that she loved you more than she was able to say, and that she was sorry she could not find another way. Emmanuel's hands on his knees were perfectly still, the restlessness in his chest. The thing that had lived there his entire life, the nameless missing weight, the something wrong that no amount of music had ever fully resolved, was gone. Not replaced by peace. Replaced by something more complicated than peace. The specific interior earthquake of a person discovering that the story they were given about themselves was a different story entirely. He was not Liberian by birth. He had always known Liberia as home and the Karmo family as his family, and he did not stop knowing those things now. But beneath them, older than them, was something else. A woman who had played a melody for him in the dark. A mother who had hidden him inside a song, and then hidden the song inside him, and then sent him out into the world carrying both without knowing it. The recording, he said. His voice was steady. He made it steady. Where is it? Lim reached under the console again. The file was on a hard drive that was 2 decades old and should not have worked and did. Sujin plugged it into her laptop with an adapter Lim produced from a drawer of carefully preserved equipment, and Emmanuel sat beside her and listened to the audio play through the laptop speakers in that underground room in Gangnam. His mother's hands on a piano. He had no memory of her face. He had been 4 years old. But he had her hands, the particular way she voiced a chord, the exact pressure she applied to the melody notes versus the harmony, the slight hesitation before a resolution that was not hesitation at all but intention, because those things lived in his own hands. He had always played that way. He had never known why. He knew now. The recording was 40 minutes long. The first 20 were the melody in its complete form. Not the fragment he had always carried, but the full composition, every movement, every encoded sequence. The final 20 minutes were her voice. She spoke in Korean and in English, alternating, as though she had not been sure which language the person who eventually found this would speak. She named names. She cited figures. She described transactions, meetings, dates, locations. She named the shell companies and the real companies behind them and the real people behind those. She described the network with the precision of a researcher who had spent months assembling a picture that powerful people had spent millions obscuring. And at the end, before the recording cut off, she said one more thing. She said it quietly, almost to herself. In English, the one who sent them is not the one who gave the order. The one who gave the order will come to you with grief on her face and love in her voice, and you must not let that stop you from seeing what she is. She is afraid of the melody because she was there that night. She was the last person to see me before they came. And she is the reason they knew where to find me. The recording ended. The room was absolutely silent. Emmanuel sat with the laptop's warmth beside him and the old engineer's careful breathing across the console and Sujin's stillness, which was the stillness of a person processing something that had just rearranged the entire architecture of what they understood. He thought about the old woman, the slow footsteps, the trembling voice, the sound she had made that he had no name for, not a sob, something older than a sob. He had taken it for grief. He had been right about that. It was grief. What he had not understood was its precise shape. Not the grief of a mother for a lost daughter. The grief of a person who made an irreversible choice and has spent 22 years living inside the consequences. She had come to his apartment not only to guide him toward the truth. She had come to see him, her grandchild, the boy she had lost along with the daughter. The last living piece of a family she had destroyed with her own hands to save herself from destruction. She told them, Sujin said, not a question. She told them where her daughter was that night, Emmanuel said. She gave them the location. Why? Emmanuel was quiet for a long moment. The recording says the network had something on her, Lim said from across the console. His voice was old and tired. I heard her say it once before she started recording. She was pacing, talking to herself. She said her mother had taken money, a long time before, from people she didn't understand were dangerous. And when they came to collect, they didn't ask for money back. They asked for information. Her own daughter, Sujin said. She thought they would frighten her, Lim said. Make her leave the country. Stop the investigation. She did not know, or she chose not to know, that frightening her was never the plan. The silence that followed lasted a long time. Emmanuel stood. Send everything to every news organization you trust, he said to Sujin. Every file, every name. Tonight. He turned toward where he understood the door to be. I need to make a phone call. To who? A television producer. He found the door and put his hand on the frame. I need to perform. Sujin grabbed his arm before he could move into the corridor. If you go public before we have protective coverage, they will come for you again, she said. And next time they won't send 3 men. Emmanuel. Her grip tightened. This is not something you survive on instinct and a cane. I know. Then why? Because the recording names everyone except the person who set it in motion, he said. Kang Minjae, the shell companies, the network, all of it is there. But there is no evidence that directly ties her to the night her daughter died. Only the recording's final words. Only my mother's voice saying what she believed without proof. He turned back toward Sujin. The melody is the proof. The complete melody, played publicly, decoded by experts in real time. It contains the missing piece. My mother was precise. She built the evidence in layers. The recording is the map. The melody is the key that confirms it. He paused. And the only person who will react to the key being turned in public, the only person who will show on their face what the music means to them, is the person who was there when it was composed. Sujin released his arm slowly. You're using yourself as bait, she said. I'm using the truth as a broadcast, he said. I'm just the instrument it travels through. She made 3 calls while he made 1. His was to a producer at KBS who owed him a favor from a charity benefit the previous spring. He explained what he needed in 4 sentences. The producer said nothing for a long moment and then said yes, the way people say yes when they understand that they are standing at the edge of something that will matter. Sujin's 3 calls went to the heads of the investigative desks at 3 separate outlets. She sent the files while she spoke. She spoke the way she did everything, without wasted words, with the particular authority of a person who has been right about important things before and knows it. By the time they emerged from the underground studio into the Seoul night, the city was moving around them the way it always did, enormous and indifferent and full of the noise of 10 million lives. But something had shifted in the texture of it. The way a room shifts when someone has opened a window. Emmanuel stood on the pavement and lifted his face. What time is it? He said. Just past 4, Sujin said. How long to the broadcast? 7 hours. He nodded. 7 hours. He had performed under worse constraints. He had performed through illness and exhaustion and the specific emotional weight of being a person who felt everything through sound in a world that communicated primarily through sight. He had never performed knowing that the melody he played might be the last note in a crime that had started before he could walk. But the melody was his. His mother had made it and she had given it to him and he had carried it for 23 years without knowing what it was. And now he knew, and the knowing did not make it heavier. It made it exactly what it had always been. Home. The broadcast was scheduled for 11. By 9 o'clock, the KBS studio audience was seated, and the cameras were live on standby, and 3 of Seoul's foremost musicologists had been briefed in a side room with copies of the recording's audio file and told to be ready to analyze a composition in real time on national television. 2 of them had asked questions. One had simply nodded and begun preparing her notation paper immediately, which was the one Emmanuel trusted. Sujin had not slept. She sat in the production gallery above the studio floor with her laptop open and her phone in her hand and watched the feeds from 3 separate cameras pointed at the grand piano centered on the stage below. Emmanuel was not yet in the room. He was in the preparation area at the back of the building, alone, which was what he had asked for. She had given it to him without argument. She was learning his particular grammar, when he needed sound and when he needed its absence. Her phone buzzed. The first outlet had published. Then the second. Then the third 40 seconds later with a headline that she read and then read again because even having assembled every piece of it herself, seeing it stated plainly in block type on a screen was a different thing entirely. She set the phone face down on the console. Below her, on the studio floor, the floor manager was counting down to air. Emmanuel heard the audience before he entered the stage. 300 people. He had performed for larger crowds and smaller ones, and the size was not what he was measuring. He was measuring the quality of the attention, the specific texture of an audience that knew something significant was about to happen but did not know precisely what. It was different from the anticipatory silence of a concert. Sharper, more awake. The silence of people who had checked their phones in the last hour and seen headlines and arrived at this room with questions they did not yet have the shape of. Good. He needed them awake. He walked to the piano with his cane and then folded it and placed it on the floor beside the bench and sat down. The audience was very quiet. He could feel the cameras. Not see them but feel the directed attention they represented, the invisible lines of focus converging on him from multiple points in the room. He placed his hands on the keys without playing. He spoke into the microphone that had been positioned at the piano. "My name is Emmanuel Karmo," he said. "I was born in Seoul in 1999. I have been blind since I was 8 years old. I have played the piano since before I can remember." He paused. "Tonight I am going to play a piece of music that I have carried my whole life without understanding what it was. What you are about to hear is not a performance. It is a document. And when it is finished, people who understand music far better than I do will explain to you exactly what is inside it." The silence in the room had changed quality. Denser. More attentive. "I would ask one thing," Emmanuel said. "If anyone in this audience finds the music familiar, if it produces in you a reaction you cannot explain, please do not leave. Whatever you feel is information. And we have waited 22 years for all of the information to be in the same room." He turned his face slightly, not toward the audience, toward somewhere else, somewhere interior. Then he began to play. He played the complete melody for the first time in his life. Not the fragment, not the improvised passage that had spilled out of him at the charity gala 3 nights ago and changed everything. The full composition, all 40 minutes of it, exactly as his hands knew it, which was exactly as his mother had recorded it in that underground studio in November 2003, because she had given it to him before words could reach him, and it had lived in his muscle memory ever since, perfect and complete and waiting. The musicologists in the side room would later say that the composition was extraordinary on its own terms. A work of genuine sophistication that used the architecture of a traditional Korean folk melody as its outer structure, while embedding within it a system of coded sequences based on a modified version of Morse notation transposed into musical intervals. They would say it was the work of a person with both a brilliant musical mind and a methodical technical intelligence. They would say they had never seen anything like it. But that was later. In the room, while it played, what people experienced was something that did not require explanation. It was the sound of a person who knew she was running out of time and chose, in that time, to make something that would last. It had the quality of all music made under pressure, condensed, urgent, burning at a temperature that normal music does not reach. It moved through the room and into people, and several of them cried without understanding why, the way people cry at certain pieces of music, the way grief travels through sound and finds the places in a listener where their own losses live. Emmanuel played with his eyes behind their darkness and his hands moving the way his mother's hands had moved, and he did not cry. He was past crying. He was somewhere further along than that. In the place where grief becomes clarity, where the weight of a thing becomes the ground you stand on. He was 26 minutes in when he heard her arrive. Not from the audience entrance. From the side of the studio, where the production staff moved during broadcasts. A slow walk, measured footsteps that carried the weight of decision in each one. He had heard those footsteps before. On the stairs of his apartment building. At his door. She had come. Of course she had come. She had spent 22 years managing this secret, and she had done it through presence and control and the careful application of her own grief as cover. Absence would have been more dangerous. Absence would have looked like guilt. She stood somewhere to his left, near the edge of the stage, and she listened. He played the final movement. This was the part of the composition that the musicologists would later identify as the evidentiary core, the section where the coded sequences were most dense, where the names and the figures and the dates were layered into the musical structure with the precision of someone who understood that this moment might be their only opportunity to speak the truth in a form that could not be intercepted or destroyed. He played it exactly as his mother had written it. He played it the way she had played it to him in the dark when he was small enough to fall asleep to it. And when the last note resolved, when the melody that moved like water going uphill finally, for the first time in its existence, came to rest, he lifted his hands from the keys and the room was absolutely silent. Then the musicologist, who had simply nodded and begun preparing her notation paper, spoke into the broadcast microphone from the side of the stage. She spoke for 11 minutes. She named every name. Sujin watched it from the gallery. She watched the studio floor where the audience sat in the specific stillness of people absorbing something that was rearranging their understanding of the world they lived in. She watched the musicologist speak with the calm authority of someone releasing a truth that had been under pressure for 2 decades. She watched the KBS producer beside her with his hand over his mouth and his eyes fixed on the monitors. And she watched, on the stage monitor to the far left, the feed from the camera positioned at the side of the studio. The old woman stood at the edge of the stage. She was very still. She was watching her grandson. Her face, on the monitor, was the face Sujin had described to Emmanuel in the car 3 nights ago. The face of someone carrying a secret so long that the secret has become more substantial than the person. But something in it had changed. The carrying was over. Whatever she had held for 22 years had just been set down. Not by her choice, but it had been set down. And the relief and the devastation of that were happening simultaneously on her face in a way that Sujin had never seen before and did not have words for. 2 uniformed officers moved into the frame from the right side of the monitor. They moved carefully. She did not resist. She straightened her jacket with one hand, a small automatic gesture of dignity, and then she allowed them to take her arms. Before they turned her toward the exit, she looked at Emmanuel, still seated at the piano, head slightly tilted, listening. Her mouth moved. Sujin could not hear it. The monitor had no audio feed from that position. But she had spent enough years watching people say things they had waited too long to say that she could read the shape of it. "I'm sorry." Whether she was saying it to Emmanuel or to the daughter she had sent to her death or to the grandchild she had lost and found and lost again, Sujin could not tell. Perhaps she was saying it to all 3 at once. Perhaps after 22 years there was no longer any difference between them. The officers walked her toward the exit. She did not look back. But at the door, the precise moment before she crossed the threshold and the studio and the piano and her grandson disappeared from her sight, she stopped. The officers paused. She stood in the doorway with the corridor light behind her and the studio light in front and asked the question in a voice that carried across the room with the particular clarity that old voices sometimes carry, when everything unnecessary has been burned away and only the essential remains. "How did you find the truth?" she said. Without ever seeing it, the room was silent. Emmanuel's hands rested on the keys. He did not turn toward her. He spoke to the piano, to the room, to the city outside that did not know yet what had just happened but would by morning. "People think blindness means darkness," he said. "But darkness is where secrets learn to speak." She looked at him for a long moment. Then the officers moved and the door closed and she was gone. The studio held its silence for 3 full seconds after the door shut. Then the room exhaled. Sujin remained in the gallery after the broadcast cut, and the floor erupted into movement. Producers and journalists and production staff all talking at once, phones ringing, the controlled chaos of a story breaking wide open. She remained very still with her hands folded on the console and looked at the stage below where Emmanuel still sat at the piano. The audience was filing out around him. He didn't move. She went down. She crossed the emptying studio floor and came to the piano and sat in the nearest chair without speaking. He heard her. She knew he heard her. They had stopped announcing themselves to each other sometime in the last 72 hours. The habit had simply fallen away, the way habits fall away when more important things take their place. They sat in the quiet of the studio while the noise moved away from them. After a long time, Emmanuel put his hands back on the keys. He didn't play the melody. He played something new. Something she had not heard before. Slower than the melody, less structured, the kind of music a person plays when they are not trying to say anything in particular but simply need their hands to keep moving because the stillness is too large to hold. Sujin listened. Outside, Seoul went about its enormous and different life. 10 million people moving through their mornings, not yet knowing that something buried had surfaced in the night. By the time they checked their phones, the headlines would already be there. The names, the network, the story of a woman who hid a truth inside a melody and a child who carried it across an ocean without knowing. They would read it and they would argue about it and they would form opinions about justice and guilt and the long life of secrets. But in the studio, right now, there was only the sound of Emmanuel's hands finding something new. Something that had no code in it. Something that was only music. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Afrokorean Storyhouse channel for more entertaining stories. Bye and see you next time.